Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Will Robinson Smith will be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. Good to have you all with us on what is a perfectly sunny morning here on Florida's Space Coast. Sunshine State really showing out for this one. So we are getting ready to see the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket with a first-time payload for SpaceX. On board is a Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft. This is for the NG-20 mission, part of Northrop Grumman's commercial resupply services 2 contract with NASA, sending cargo and science, as well as some other supplies and goodies for the astronauts on board the International Space Station. We've got our full team out here for live launch coverage today. Of course, our editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast. We also have our ace photography crew out here getting ready to snap plenty of pictures, both from near the pad as well as around Central Florida for this launch. Got Adam Bernstein here at the press site. Michael Caine is also getting ready over on the Cape side of things. If you're not already following them on our social media sites, we're all on X. You can find Adam Bernstein at ABernNYC, Michael Caine at MD Caine Jr., also on X at W_Robinson Smith. T-minus 1 hour, 48 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. We also have tracking assistance today from our friend Pete Karstens over at Max Q Productions. And we also have our friend Chuck Briggs helping to track the launch today. So have this covered with plenty of angles for our live launch coverage here at Spaceflight now. Very excited to bring this mission to you. And we also have our wonderful moderators helping us out in the live chat. I see Stephanie B is with us, saying good day from Australia. Good day to you, Stephanie. Ooh, it is a blistering 2 a.m. where she is located, so appreciate you being with us on very early part of the day for you, Stephanie. So thanks for the help, and any of the other moderators who may happen to pop in on the fun as we get closer to liftoff. We are T-minus 1 hour, 47 minutes, 15 seconds and counting to the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. As this is a flight heading to the International Space Station, there is an instantaneous liftoff window for this that is coming up at 12:07 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For those joining us from around the world, that is 17:07 UTC. Again, 12:07 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If needed, SpaceX does have a backup opportunity on Thursday. That instantaneous window opens at 11:18 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're now T-minus 1 hour, 44 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. As this is a launch heading to the International Space Station, we like to bring you a little bit of extra content where we can. Make our live coverage stand out and make it your time worth it joining us here on a Tuesday morning. We're about to get ready for a live interview, so forgive the extended silence you may hear for just a moment as we are getting configured for that, but we will be right back in just a couple of minutes with our live coverage and our first live interview of the morning as we get ready to see the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket supporting the NG-20 mission, a Cygnus spacecraft heading up to the International Space Station, Northrop Grumman's 20th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the ISS. And also, this will be the first time since 2017 that a Cygnus spacecraft has launched from the Cape. Recently, they've been launching using the Antares 220 or 230 plus spacecraft or rocket from NASA's Wallops Island, Virginia site. So we will be right back with you. I'll be joining you on camera. We'll be speaking with Dr. Lisa Carnell, who is NASA's Director of the Biological and Physical Sciences Division. We'll be talking about some of the experiments that her office is sending up to the International Space Station for work in just a moment. We'll be right back. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to our live coverage of the NG-20 mission. The first time a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is going to be launching a Cygnus spacecraft from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We are now T-minus 1 hour, 33 minutes and about 25 seconds to liftoff. Lots of time ahead before we get to the start of fueling. So we want to talk about some of the science that's going to be flying on board, because there's more than 8,200 pounds of cargo and science experiments that's heading up to the International Space Station in just about an hour and a half. And we are very fortunate to be joined by one of the people who is over 3 of the experiments that's going to be heading up to the ISS. This is Dr. Lisa Carnell, who's the director of NASA's Biological and Physical Sciences Division. Lisa, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me here. We are so incredibly excited for NG-20's launch of the 3 payloads that we have going up on board. Right now we have Mabel A, that's our nickname for, it's a mesenchymal stem cell experiment that will help us understand bone loss in spaceflight. And Dr. Zubair may be joining you later, and he's spearheading that experiment. We have a second payload that is studying the effect of plants and microbes in that interaction that will help us increase plant productivity as we look towards the moon and Mars. And that is being spearheaded by Dr. Simon Gilroy of the University of Wisconsin. And our third experiment, which is really interesting, is going up in this little can we call BRIC. So we've used these a lot, and they've been really productive for us, and we're looking at the effect of spaceflight on bacterial adaptation, and that will have translational benefits too to life on Earth. And Dr. Kelly Rice from the University of Florida is spearheading that experiment. So go NG-20, we're really excited for all the science that BPS is doing and flying on board.
And want to kind of break those down piece by piece, starting with the first one, looking at bone density loss, because that's something that has been studied before, but we still don't know a whole lot about it. Can you just talk about what this is going to uncover, specifically, as far as moving the ball forward, understanding bone loss, not only for astronauts, but this also applies to older folks here on Earth as well?
Yeah, so the study by Dr. Zubair is really diving in to look at the mechanisms that are associated with bone loss in spaceflight. We've been exploring and seeing bone loss in the astronauts, even on short duration missions, and sometimes they don't even fully recover from the bone loss. So it's really important, especially as we look to these longer duration exploration missions, that we get an understanding and see if there's any sort of mitigation we can do. Another benefit that has significant potential is understanding the mechanisms that are associated with this bone loss, and these stem cells are at the forefront of producing the cells that are required for generating bone. That as we look to that, we can look and see whether or not there is normal aging associated disease that we can correlate these mechanisms to. That may help us understand aging on Earth and bone loss like osteoporosis much better.
And we were just talking before we started live that you've been the director of BPS now since last summer. First off, congratulations.
Thank you.
How is the program kind of looking at these 3 experiments as a part of its broader portfolio?
Oh, that is a great question, and a really beautiful follow-up is that right after this launch, we're holding our 3rd decadal survey retreat, where we just received our decadal survey from the National Academies in September, and we've been looking through, and that it identifies the priorities of the science that we should be conducting. And these science experiments were, chosen and selected to fly long before that came out, and they align beautifully with what we've identified and what they've called out in the decadal survey for us. And so as we look and plan this week, we'll be assessing how these experiments right now and the future ones align with the plans and priorities that we have going forward.
Gotcha. And if you can give us a little preview of some of the next experiments that are going to be part of BPS portfolio to fly, and if there may be some tie-in between the ones that are on Cygnus today and what you've got looking forward to in the future.
So something that I would love to share with you is that our Biological and Physical Sciences division, so we cover everything. We have the most incredibly diverse portfolio from what you've been hearing about, a lot of this biology experiments where we cover animals, we cover rodents, plants, microbes, and tissue chips. That's one of my big passion areas. But then we also have our physical sciences side of the house. And in that we do combustion, where we touch on fire safety. We do cryogenic thermal management and materials, looking at how we can mold and shape things from regolith when we go on exploration missions. And not only that, we also touch quantum. And so when you're talking about the next experiments we have going up, so we'll be launching on SpaceX 30 coming up. Cal, the Science Module 1, will be flying up there so we can continue doing cold atom laboratory research that's helping us understand Bose-Einstein condensate. We've been doing that for quite some time. We have several other investigations that will be building on this research that will be touching the biology and physical sciences, flow, boiling, condensation experiments. So we have a lot to look forward to on the SpaceX 30 launch as well.
Well, you've got your plate full, so I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us here. Best of luck. Congratulations on the Cygnus launch, and we look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us and letting us share all the incredible science we're doing in BPS.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always fantastic to keep track of, and you guys are involved in so much cool things that are happening both here on Earth and coming back to and from space, so look forward to covering all of it.
All right, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Now, thanks to Dr. Lisa. Of course, we'll have much more on the countdown of this NG-20 mission, getting closer now, less than an hour and a half to liftoff. We'll be right back and look forward a little bit later on in the countdown. We're going to have a conversation with Patrick O'Neill from the ISS National Lab. So look forward to that, and we'll be right back.
We're now T-minus 1 hour, 20 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. Our thanks again to Dr. Lisa Carnell, the Division Director of NASA's Biological and Physical Sciences Division. Really appreciate her spending some time with us and talking science that's heading up to the International Space Station on the NG-20 mission. I want to also thank all of you who are joining us for our live launch coverage. If you're just happening to pop in now, I am Will Robinson Smith for Spaceflight Now. You're watching our live coverage of the NG-20 mission, getting ready to send a Cygnus spacecraft up to the International Space Station. This will be the first time that SpaceX is launching this particular spacecraft. Not the first time that Cygnus is flying to the space station, though, of course. This is the 20th Commercial Resupply Services mission for the Cygnus. As you can see here on this infographic from NASA. Of course, this will be its first but not last trip on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Just a minor note, noticing in this NASA graphic, though, in its Falcon 9 graphic there, it does show a Dragon spacecraft, which is what would normally be used for a cargo resupply mission that SpaceX launches. But the Cygnus spacecraft is launching inside some specially outfitted payload fairings that SpaceX worked with Northrop Grumman to make sure it was compatible for the Cygnus spacecraft. As we've seen with some other missions to the ISS, there were some items that had to be loaded late, and so SpaceX cut a 5-foot by 4-foot wide door near the bottom of the Falcon 9 payload fairings so that they could back up a truck and have access to the Cygnus spacecraft for loading. This is an environmentally controlled hatch that they had designed and set up so that they could make sure that the spacecraft maintained its pristine state. If you'd like to help support our coverage as we get rolling on in with this count, great, free, and easy way to do it. If you haven't already, hit the like button if you would, please. That'd be a great way to help the YouTube algorithm do its thing and allow more folks to find this live coverage as we come up on the 1 hour mark in about 17.5 minutes. Also be sure to subscribe to Spaceflight Now if you haven't, and ring the notification bell. That way you get alerted whenever we do start these live streams, and you get notified when we post videos as well. We're also powered by our wonderful channel members, like Alan Thompson, who's been a member for 3 months. Really appreciate you being with us here, Alan. And last but not least, you can help support what we do here at Spaceflight Now and our ongoing endeavor to increase the quality of our live streams with our staff and equipment by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. You'll not only be helping to support what we do here at Spaceflight Now, but also we'd love to bring you into the conversation if you have a comment or question that's appropriate to be read on the show. Love to address that, as we do have one here from Jeremy Ladd with a $5 Super Chat. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Who says, this message actually goes to one of our photographers, Adam Bernstein. He says, hey, Adam, I tagged you in some pictures from the last Falcon 9. So I'd love to see those. Appreciate the support, Jeremy. We're now T-minus 1 hour, 13 minutes, 34 seconds and counting. For those of you who are already joining us, we'll go ahead and take a look ahead at the trajectory for today's launch, as this one is space station bound. It's a different flight path than recent. We're actually going to stand by on the trajectory chat for just a moment. We're getting that configured. T-minus 1 hour, 10 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. While we get the trajectory information in work, let's go ahead and talk about the Cygnus spacecraft itself. Northrop Grumman has a tradition of naming all of its Cygnus spacecrafts. This one happens to be named the SS Patricia, or Patty Hilliard Robertson. Patricia Robertson was selected as a NASA astronaut back in 1998. She unfortunately did not make it to the International Space Station. She was scheduled to fly on a mission back in 2002. However, she unfortunately died back in 2001 from injury sustained during a private plane crash. So this particular Cygnus spacecraft is named in honor of her. After the Cygnus launches, it's set to arrive on February 1st in the early hours of the morning at 4:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday. NASA astronaut Jasmine McBelly will use the Canadarm2 to capture the Cygnus, and it will be installed on the Unity module's Earth-facing port, where it will spend the next 6 months docked at the orbiting outpost. After it departs, though, the science is not done, because there's one more experiment that's on board the SSS Patricia Patty Hilliard Robertson. This is the Kentucky Reentry Probe Experiment 2, or CREBY 2. It's designed to take the measurements and demonstrate a thermal protection system for the spacecraft and its contents during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Obviously, the more data that NASA and its partners can get about spacecraft re-entry, the safer all these types of flights become. We're now T-minus 1 hour, 7 minutes, 55 seconds and counting to the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket supporting the NG-20 launch of a Cygnus spacecraft. We're now T-minus 1 hour, 2 minutes, 18 seconds and counting. As we approach the 1 hour mark ahead of the launch of the Falcon 9 rocket, we do have word from the Brevard Emergency Management Office that they have activated their launch operations support team in preparation for this Falcon 9 launch. Good sign, at least from the support staff, that things are moving forward as expected. As we are approaching that 1 hour mark, taking a look at the launch weather forecast for this mission, things are pretty ideal for SpaceX. 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 95% chance of favorable weather coming into today's launch, with the cumulus cloud roll being the only potential impact. But as I take a look outside near the Cape, things are pretty much clear today, so those cumulus clouds shouldn't be much of an issue, if at all. And as we've now passed we're now within the 1 hour mark, let's go ahead and re-rack for those of us who may be joining us live now for the first time. Good afternoon, or still good morning, I suppose. It's 11:07 a.m. here on the East Coast. See a helicopter flying nearby. The bottom of our friend Chuck Briggs' camera views. You're looking at a Falcon 9 rocket getting ready to support the NG-20 mission. This will be a commercial resupply services mission heading up to the International Space Station, not with a Dragon, but with a Cygnus spacecraft this time. A first for SpaceX. I'm Will Robinson Smith for Spaceflight Now. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us as we are in the midst of live launch coverage for the NG-20 mission. You're taking a look at Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We are T-minus 58 minutes, 47 seconds and counting from the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket, getting ready to send that Cygnus spacecraft on its way to connect with the International Space Station. As the mission name suggests, this is the 20th commercial resupply services mission for the Cygnus spacecraft. Just the first of currently 3 that are on deck for SpaceX supporting Northrop Grumman's spacecraft. The reason we're seeing a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket launch Cygnus instead of the previously used Antares 230 has to do with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the inability to access the necessary rocket parts to support the Antares vehicle as it stands now. Northrop Grumman and Firefly Aerospace are actually in the process of creating a new Antares 330 rocket that's expected to fly for the first time no earlier than 2025. So in the meantime, to support its contract obligations with NASA, the Cygnus spacecraft will fly at least 3 missions using the Falcon 9 rocket. We've got our full launch team out for this one on a Tuesday morning, coming into the afternoon very shortly. Got our launch photographers Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane out and about getting ready to support with their launch photography. If you're not already following them on X, formerly known as Twitter, these are their handles, so you can keep up to date with all of their launch photos. Got Adam at ABurn NYC and Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr. This is an infographic showing what the Cygnus spacecraft looks like in its on-orbit configuration. And normally that's what the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket would look like when it's supporting a cargo flight to the ISS. It would have a Dragon on top, as you see in this NASA-created graphic here. However, as you can see in the live picture just to the right of that, the Cygnus spacecraft actually is inside a couple of payload fairings. SpaceX had to create a doorway at the bottom of one of those fairing halves in order to allow for access to the Cygnus spacecraft for some late loading procedures, which they did over the course of Monday afternoon heading into Monday evening. Rounding out our team, in addition to Adam and Michael doing some launch photography, we also have our friend Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions, who's helping us with tracking views, as is Chuck Briggs. And of course, our Stephen Young is helping to oversee the technical aspects of the broadcast today. We're T-minus 55 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. Less than 20 minutes away from the start of, or when the call out for the start of propellant load will happen. Because SpaceX is not providing clean mission audio for this operation, though we won't actually hear that call out. But that fueling pull will be taken at T-minus 38 minutes. If you joined us after the hour mark, the weather for today's launch is pretty pristine today. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 95% chance of favorable weather at liftoff. And as you can see, taking a look at the wider vantage point of the Falcon 9 vehicle, do have some clouds off in the distance, but otherwise a pretty clear day here on Florida Space Coast. This view of the countdown clock showing pad 39A also helps paint the picture of just how nice it is out here. A little crisp from a temperature perspective, but compared to winter weather in other parts of the country, it is pretty darn nice. Adam is rocking a t-shirt and A-OK. We're now T-minus 53 minutes, 28 seconds and counting. If for whatever reason SpaceX is not able to launch this mission today for whatever reason, they do have another instantaneous backup launch window on Thursday. That's at 11:18 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Current launch window for today, though, is 12:07 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 17:07 UTC. If you haven't already, we appreciate your support with our live coverage. Quick and easy way to do that is by hitting the like button here on this video. Share the stream, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to Spaceflight Now and ringing the notification bell. That way you get alerted whenever our live coverage begins. and you don't miss any of the videos that we upload as well. We're also powered by our wonderful channel members, so thanks to all of you who are popping in the live chat and for your ongoing support of what we do here at Spaceflight Now. Thanks to folks like Liz Linlinsky, and I think I saw Callistia Lee pop in a little bit earlier in our live coverage. Alan Thompson, member for 3 months. You can also use the YouTube Super Chat feature if you have a comment or question that's appropriate to be read in our show, or you just like to help support what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and it goes towards increasing the quality of our hardware and supporting our team as we do increasingly more on the ground reporting, not only here in Florida, but also around the country. We're just at Johnson Space Center talking to the astronauts of the Crew 8 mission. That's set to launch from the pad that you see there on your screen, 39A, coming up next month. Now T-minus 51 minutes on the dot. As we continue to step through the count, let's go ahead and take a look at the countdown timeline and some of the milestones that we're looking forward to at this point. At T-minus 38 minutes, the SpaceX launch director will give their go-ahead for the start of propellant load. If that poll is favorable, then fueling will begin at T-minus 35 minutes with a couple of events. Rocket-grade kerosene will be loaded onto the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 rocket, otherwise known as RP-1. At the same time, liquid oxygen will be loaded onto the first stage. At T-minus 30 minutes, first stage helium load begins. That cryogenic helium is used to pressurize the propellant tanks for flight. At T-minus 26 minutes, the second stage helium load begins. Same idea, but on the second stage of the vehicle. Then at T-minus 20 minutes, 50 seconds, the strong-back chill-down procedure will begin. It's marked by the so-called big vent that we'll see from the strong-back. It's preceded at the T-minus 23 minute mark by the loading of second stage kerosene wrapping up. Then at T-minus 16 minutes, second stage liquid oxygen loading begins. Moving along through the count, that brings us to T-minus 7 minutes. That's when the engine chill-down sequence gets underway for the 9 Merlin 1D engines. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps, protecting them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence begin. We'll start by the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 and will stay there until liftoff. At that point, the strong back pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About T-minus 3 minutes, the first stage liquid oxygen loading should be complete. 2 minutes out is when the second stage liquid oxygen loading should be wrapping up. Then in the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for liftoff 3 seconds out, or 45 seconds out. Then the edge ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And then if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite, We'll see a liftoff of the Falcon 9 coming up at T0, set for 12:07 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A nice lunchtime launch for those of us here in Central Florida, or if you're on the Eastern time zone. Currently T-minus 47 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. Less than 10 minutes away from the launch director making that call on the start of prop load. I also want to briefly thank Rose Waters for a $1 super chat. Really appreciate that, Rose. Thank you so much for your support. We're now T-minus 45 minutes, 2 seconds and counting. On board the Falcon 9 rocket, of course, the Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft, as I mentioned. Taking a little bit of an overview look inside, this graphic brought to us by NASA, giving us an overview of, by pounds and kilograms, what's on board this Cygnus spacecraft. In total, about a little more than 8,200 pounds, or a little over 3,700 kilograms on board. You can see more than 3,000 pounds, or more than 1,300 kilograms of that are science investigations. If you were with us earlier, we had the opportunity to have a conversation about some of that science that's flying up to the ISS with Dr. Lisa Carnell. And in just a little bit, we'll be joined by Patrick O'Neill with the ISS National Lab to continue our science discussion. Of course, this is far from the last time SpaceX will be launching science and cargo up to the International Space Station, as they do have both some supplies that will go up with the Crew 8 mission set to launch from Pad 39A. That's heading up in late February. Its timing is a little bit dependent right now on what happens with Intuitive Machines' Nova Sea lander launch, which also needs to launch from Pad 39A. So if Intuitive Machines sticks to its launch window, then Crew 8 would launch pretty late in the month, around February 29th, this is a leap year, or March 1st, somewhere in that ballpark. However, if for whatever reason the IM-1 mission with Intuitive Machines misses its February launch window and pushes to March, then Crew 8 could launch a little bit earlier. So you've got some science going up on that, and then of course there is the CRS 30 mission with a SpaceX Cargo Dragon spacecraft. So lots of opportunities to talk about science for today and moving forward. We're now T-minus 42 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. We're now at T-minus 37 minutes, 42 seconds and counting. About 20 seconds past the point at which the SpaceX launch director would have made their call on the start of propellant load. fueling set to begin in less than 2.5 minutes if everything is in fact on track. As we get ready to look for signs of fueling and make those call outs as we are aware of them, let's go ahead and talk trajectory, shall we, as we've got that ready for our discussion here. SpaceX, of course, calling upon their workhorse pad, Slick 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This pad will actually be in use fairly soon again for another NASA mission called PACE, which we'll have much more coverage on in the near future. But let's keep our focus here now on the NG-20 mission. When the Falcon 9 leaves, we'll head in a northeasterly trajectory here with that first stage booster making a flip maneuver headed back for a land landing at landing zone number 1 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This will mark the 35th Falcon 9 booster landing at LZ-1. This will be the 44th booster landing on land here in Florida. And this will also be the 269th Falcon booster landing to date. Also worth noting that this is SpaceX's 100th launch in a 365-day period. The first time that the company, if they're successful today, will have notched that milestone using just orbital launches, i.e. Falcon flights, not counting the Starship test flights. So a nice coup and nice feather in SpaceX's cap if they were able to pull off the launch today. Now T-minus 35 minutes and counting. At this point, if all is moving on track, SpaceX will have begun the fueling process. We're going to keep a close eye out now. Little tricky given the heat waves that we're seeing between our camera and the rocket, but we're going to be looking for signs of vapor forming along the bottom of the first stage booster, a sign that fueling is in fact underway. We'll also, of course, be watching for word from SpaceX themselves confirming that propellant load has begun. T-minus 32 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. We're currently trying to keep an eye out for signs of vapor forming near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. A sign of fueling as we await for official word from SpaceX that fueling has begun on this mission. Now T-minus 31 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. While we have not heard from SpaceX yet, we're starting to see some vapor form near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. If you look where the transporter erector starts to taper up into that more parallel section at the bottom quarter of the rocket, you can see some of those wisps of vapor streaming away from the Falcon 9 rocket. They're continuing to load that super chilled liquid oxygen onto the first stage. Rocket-grade kerosene also being loaded onto both the first and the second stages of the Falcon 9 vehicle. So a good sign that fueling is in fact underway and things are moving forward for an on-time liftoff, that instantaneous launch time of 12:07 p.m. Eastern. Our thanks, as always, to our friend Chuck Briggs for bringing us this particular view of the Falcon 9 rocket. We're now T-minus 26 minutes, 8 seconds and counting. In just a moment, we'll be joined by Patrick O'Neill with the ISS National Lab. So we're going to pause commentary for just a second as we get set up for that. Briefly want to take a quick look at the live chat, though. Want to thank a few folks for their support. Maria Langer, thank you so much for $5 super chat. Really appreciate that. And Cynthia with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much. Cynthia says, thanks so much for your great coverage of the launches. Well, thank you for your support, which is not only invaluable to us as a team, but helps us to create more dynamic and robust live launch opportunities as we do have now. So we'll be right back with our live interview in just a moment. We'll be talking with Pat O'Neill. As we get prepared for that, if you haven't already, be sure to click the like button and share this stream so that more people can see this live interview and, of course, our live coverage of the launch itself. You're watching Spaceflight Now's live broadcast as we cover the NG-20 mission, sending a Cygnus spacecraft from Northrop Grumman up to the ISS on board a Falcon 9 rocket.
Hey everyone, thanks again for sticking with us for our live coverage here at Spaceflight Now, looking at the NG-20 mission, a Falcon 9 rocket sending up a Cygnus spacecraft for the very first time, the first of 3 planned such missions. As you can see from the countdown clock, we are now just about 20 minutes away from the planned liftoff. The big vent should be underway as they're chilling down the feed lines ahead of liquid oxygen loading on board the second stage of the vehicle. So things moving along smoothly with the fueling process, and that hardware's in good orientation, moving along well. We want to talk about the science here. Of course, this is the reason why we're all here, and of course we have a great guest joining us once again to talk science. You saw him for the AX-3 mission. He's back in action for NG-20. Mr. Patrick O'Neill, thanks for being with us again.
Will, it's a pleasure to be here. Beautiful afternoon.
It is.
Although
yeah.
it's not afternoon yet. We're getting there.
We're on the cusp of afternoon. By the time we get to launch, it'll be afternoon.
There it is.
But it's afternoon in our hearts.
There it is.
Yeah.
I like that.
So obviously we've got a lot of science, 8,200 pounds of cargo and supplies on board the Cygnus spacecraft, and I believe 20 of the experiments are sponsored by the ISS National Lab.
There's a lot of science that's going on in this mission, sponsored by the ISS National Lab. We're really excited about it. To your point, this is the first commercial resupply services mission of the year. We obviously have AX-3 that's up there right now. The astronauts are hopefully finishing up some of the experiments that they've already launched with them. But again, this is going to be a very, very busy year for research on the space station, and again, really excited to be here with the Northrop Grumman team and SpaceX teams as we're getting ready for the last few minutes before launch.
And before we talk about Cygnus, just want to get a little check-in with AX-3. Have you been able to communicate with Axiom Space and the astronauts working up there? How are some of those experiments
Well,
going?
I mean, I literally have video chats with them all the time. No,
of
kidding.
course.
No, actually, so from what I understand, they have been very, very busy, but they've been very, very productive during their time. So again, we're excited about them coming back down and being able to further analyze the investigations that they were working on. And so, seeing what happens with next steps with the next core of astronauts that go up from Axiom.
And so with Cygnus, obviously there's a lot of great science, as there always is, flying in this mission, but we were talking just a moment ago about a smaller company that's actually flying for the 9th time. You talk about their science flying on board.
Yeah, so Lambda Vision is the name of the company. They were a startup out of the University of Connecticut, and they are trying to find a way to develop a retinal implant that can be manufactured in space and bring it back down for patients here on Earth that suffer from macular degeneration and retinal pigmentosis. So to your point, 9 missions. I mean, normally when you think about sending investigations to the space station, you're like, gosh, it's going to be really time-consuming and very expensive. So how is it that a company that is a small startup like this is able to do that over and over and over again and iterate on the science that they're learning? I think that it's a fantastic use case of how, if you have a good idea, bring it to us and we'll find a way to make it happen. So again, they continue to build on the science that they're flying, and really excited to see what this means, not only from for their perspective, but also the notion of in-space production applications in low Earth orbits. So this is kind of why we have a space station and a national lab to begin with, is so that you can use it as this unique test bed to really validate unique concepts that otherwise might not be able to happen here on Earth.
And we've seen some on-station manufacture of in-body parts, like for example the meniscus that was 3D printed recently by Redwire Space. Why is it so important to be able to have that opportunity to print something on station and bring it back down to Earth? It's obviously not a mass production, so we're not at that stage yet, but how much of an important proving ground are opportunities like this?
Well, I think that you just hit the nail on the head at the very end. It's a proving ground. I don't know if this space station will be the one where we're really going to be in a position to go scale with manufacturing, but it sets the foundation for what's going to happen next. I mean, there's already a variety of companies who are looking to build those next commercial destinations in low Earth orbit. There's also other companies that are trying to just have, free flyers, if you will, that have the chance of sending R&D to station, or not station, but to space, and then just, manufacture and then bring them back down. So you can make the argument that space is truly turning into that next growing, emerging marketplace.
And want to make a fueling marker as we look at the countdown clock. We're about 6 seconds away from the start of liquid oxygen loading on the Falcon 9 vehicle there. So the big vent has wrapped up. Things are continuing to move smoothly with that. Just wanted to make that time marker as we continue on the fueling process. Patrick, before we let you go, there's several more experiments that we didn't hit on, and unfortunately we don't have time to go through everyone blow by blow. But you did mention when you were here last time, I believe there's another tissue chips experiment that's flying up to the station.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that before
I can talk a little bit about it. Also, funny enough too, they are from the University of Connecticut, so not the same group obviously, but this is actually from the University of Connecticut. This is from a long-standing relationship that we have with the National Science Foundation, wherein they have been funding tissue engineering experiments on station for a very long time. For those unaware, what is really cool about these tissue chips is it's like almost like a thumb drive in a sense, but they're able to have like mimic the human conditions, if you will. So if you're able to send, you know, a tissue culture or something like that, it might think that like it's in a normal human body. What's different about that is in the past, prior to tissue chips, you'd be sending model organisms to the space station. That's a lot more heavy, it's a lot more time consuming, and on top of that, it's also not a one-to-one comparison of what a human body would react like in space. So this University of Connecticut team is building on additional tissue engineering experiments that have been happening on station. But again, it's a really fun technological aspect that previously was not there until a few years ago. And because of that, we really think that we're going to be able to dive deeper into better understanding of drug discovery and drug development as well.
And just lastly, before we let you go, obviously there's many more things on your plate looking down the rest of the year. What's kind of the next big thing that you're looking forward to from the ISS National Lab after you get through the Cygnus launch?
Well, to your point, it's going to be very, very busy. So obviously, once this launch is done, we're going to be focusing on Crew 8, and then after that, we're going to have SpaceX CRS-30, and then SpaceX CRS-31, and then NG-21. So all of that's going to be happening in the foreseeable future. So again, the astronauts are going to be incredibly busy up there. I will also tell you too that every single one of those missions is just jam-packed full of science. So again, they're going to be very busy up there, but also hopefully we'll be able to build on a lot of great science that's flown in the past and really apply the knowledge that's been gained so that we can make the space station, you know, these next few years kind of the era of utilization and really just try to, you know, learn as much as we can so that way when we do segue to a commercial destination in low Earth orbit or multiple, there's a lot of great use cases for people to leverage.
Alrighty, Patrick O'Neill with the ISS National Lab. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And of course, we've got much more live coverage here on Spaceflight Now's YouTube channel. Be sure to stick with us. Just taking a look back at the countdown clock, we are just about 13 minutes away from this launch. The next big fueling milestone coming up is at T-minus 7 minutes. That's when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway, flowing a little bit of liquid oxygen into the plumbing and turbo pumps to protect them from the startup sequence and the risk of thermal shock and damage. So we'll be watching that, continuing to keep an eye on the countdown, make sure that's all great. But as you can see around us, weather does not seem to be a watch item today. 95% favorable heading into this launch. So we're going to head back inside, get ready for liftoff itself. We'll be back in just a moment. You're watching live coverage of the NG-20 mission here on Spaceflight Now's YouTube channel.
We're now T minus 8 minutes, 7 seconds and counting. Our thanks again to our friend Pat O'Neill with the ISS National Lab for talking about some of the science flying on board the Cygnus spacecraft. We're less than a minute away from the engine chill down sequence, but before we go ahead and get to that, let's go ahead and talk about the booster history for this particular Falcon 9 first stage booster. Tail number 1077 getting ready to fly once again for its 10th flight. Its first launch was a crewed mission back on October 5th, 2022. This was the Crew 5 mission to the International Space Station aboard the Dragon named Endurance. This mission distinct for a couple reasons, as it was commanded by NASA astronaut Nicole Mann, who became the first indigenous woman to go to space. It was also the first time a Russian cosmonaut flew to the ISS on board a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. Next up was January 18th, 2023, the launch of the GPS-3 Space Vehicle 6 satellite. This series of GPS satellites, manufactured by Lockheed Martin, and are nicknamed for famous explorers. SVO-6 was nicknamed Amelia Earhart. The third launch was a month after that, on February 18th, when this booster launched the Inmarsat 6F2 satellite. Back in August of last year, Viasat released a statement saying that the 16F2 satellite, quote, suffered a power subsystem anomaly, though, during its orbit raising phase. Viasat acquired Inmarsat back in May of 2023. Moving right along, Starlink 5-10 was the next mission that launched back on March 29th. Fifth mission was another Dragon mission, this time of the Cargo Persuasion. This was SpaceX's 28th commercial resupply services mission, sending up more than 7,000 pounds of research and science supplies to the ISS. This mission also featured the launch of a pair of rollout solar arrays. The sixth launch was on August 3rd for the Galaxy 37/Horizons 4 satellite for Intelsat. This is part of the company's constellation refresh to meet FCC requirements. And then we're on to a series of Starlink launches. It's Starlink 6-13 on September 1st. Starlink 6-25 on October 30th. Starlink 6-33 was back on December 7th, 2023. Bringing us to the now most recent launch, coming up in just about 5 minutes, of the Cygnus spacecraft heading up to the ISS. We're now less than 4 minutes away, 30 seconds out from the start of the strong back retract sequence. The clamp arms will open up, and the transporter erector will lean back about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Should see that process starting in just a moment here. T-minus 3 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. See the transporter erector start to move away from the Falcon 9 now. coming up on 2.5 minutes. We're nearing the end of liquid oxygen loading on the second stage. That'll wrap up fueling of the Falcon 9 rocket. We're also hearing that the final checkouts are being done on the Cygnus spacecraft, making sure that it's ready for its flight aboard a Falcon 9 rocket, entering into the last 2 minutes of the countdown here. We did hear that call out for Stage 2 lock load complete. What you're seeing now is a venting of the liquid oxygen line on the transporter erector. One of the final steps as SpaceX prepares to launch its Falcon 9 rocket. This is set to be SpaceX's 10th launch of the year so far. Its 100th within the last 365 days. Falcon 9 is in startup. Getting ready for the call out of go for launch from the launch director. And we did get that call out that the Falcon 9 is ready for launch, coming up on the last 35 seconds. 30 seconds. "15 seconds. And here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket supporting a Cygnus spacecraft for the very first time. The Falcon 9 rocket has cleared the tower. Some great views from our tracking team here around Central Florida. This view from our friend Chuck Briggs. Let's listen to the roar of those 9 Merlin engines. Where they call out that vehicles pass through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Minute and a half into the mission now. Coming up as we head into the second minute of the mission, there'll be a number of items happening in quick succession. Main engine cutoff at 2 minutes and 16 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation. Then the second stage engine will start, that Merlin vacuum engine. 2 minutes 33 seconds, we'll see the start of the boost back burn. And then just before the 3-minute mark, the fairing deployment will begin. Getting some great views from this view from Pete Karstens. We saw Chuck Briggs as well as Adam Bernstein as well. See stage separation there on your screen. These views from onboard SpaceX cameras, you see that first stage falling back down towards Florida. Boost back burn also underway. Some great views from our friend Pete Carson's with Max Q Productions. Coming up on fairing deployment momentarily. With that call out for fairing separation. Those fairings have deployed. You can see them for just a second glinting away from the Falcon 9 second stage. That boost back shut down. Call out. That a little over 3.5 minutes into the flight. As this is a pretty crystal clear day, we've got a great view of that first stage booster. Hypersonic grid fins deploying, as you can see in the SpaceX onboard cameras. We have callouts that everything is following nominal trajectories on this mission. Coming up into 4th minute of this flight. Coming up at T plus 6 minutes 38 seconds will be the first stage entry burn. You can see that SpaceX is sporting the shorter engine nozzle on the Merlin vacuum engines. One of the options it has to exercise on such missions. At T plus 4 minutes 40 seconds into flight. Seeing some great views from Pete Carson's. What you're seeing with those little bursts there as the Falcon 9 first stage booster makes its way back to landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station are the cold gas thrusters, helping to adjust the attitude of the vehicle as it's heading back down. Make sure it's in the right orientation ahead of the first stage entry burn beginning that's coming up now in less than a minute. Now 6 minutes into flight. Coming up on the start of that entry burn. Now just about 10 seconds away. Should see the landing burn begin right about now. There you go. Some great views of that entry burn from Pete Carson's tracking camera. This burn lasts just about 17 seconds as you see it coming to a conclusion there. At a little over 7 minutes into flight. Great views here, continuing on from Pete Carson's Max Q Productions. That landing burn set to begin in less than 30 seconds as this booster is making its way back down to landing zone 1 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Just fantastic views here from Pete. Landing burn set to begin in 5 seconds. And there's the start of that landing burn. We should hear a sonic boom as it's coming back in. Let's listen and watch in. And there you can see, and there's the sonic boom. This was the 10th launch, 10th landing. You see the Merlin vacuum engine has now shut down for SECO 1. The Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft getting ready to deploy in just over 5 minutes from now, at T plus 14 minutes and 40 seconds. Great job by our tracking team here on the ground. Just excellent tracking views. Of course, we're going to continue to keep these live pictures with us. Taking a look from SpaceX's onboard camera views here of the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. The secondary mission of recovering the first stage booster we saw was perfectly successful by all accounts. As we get ready for the Cygnus spacecraft deployment, I want to thank a few more folks for their support of our live launch coverage this afternoon. Our thanks to Smooth Juice for a 10-pound super chat. This one coming in a little bit before we had the lunch itself, as we were getting ready to talk to our friend Pat O'Neill, who says, here's to the 20-minute vent, some coffee, and the excellent views. Thank you, Spaceflight Now. When do you think they will use Slick 40 for human launches? That is an excellent question, one that I wish we had a more definitive answer to. All that SpaceX and NASA have said so far is they're working toward that goal, and generically soon, but we don't know exactly for what mission it will be used for, whether that will be private astronaut mission with Axiom Space for AX4, or if possibly NASA is looking at that for its Crew 9 mission with SpaceX. Or potentially it could be used for the forthcoming Polaris Dawn mission, led by entrepreneur Jared Isaacman. There's 4 private astronauts going to be doing a 5-day free-flying mission launching from here at the Cape, where they will perform the first commercial spacewalk. Spacesuit development, very exciting, underway right now. If you haven't already, we actually have a video up on the channel, a conversation that we had recently with Commander Jared Isaacman and Polaris Dawn pilot Scott Kidd Poteet, talking about their training for the Polaris Dawn mission and the spacesuit development with SpaceX. So if you haven't already, be sure to go ahead and check that video out. See if we can post the link to that in the live chat here so it's nice and convenient for you. we go. Got in the live chat now. Now T plus 12 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. Now just 2 minutes away from the deployment of the Cygnus spacecraft. I want to thank a few more folks in the interim. Thanks to our wonderful channel member, Callistia Lee, for a very generous $20 super chat. Thanks, Callistia. Who says, "Go Falcon, go Cygnus. Beautiful view from my front yard in Port St. Lucie. Thanks to the Will and the mods and all of Spaceflight Now for the amazing coverage, as always." Thanks, Callistia, for your ongoing support. Same to SG. Good to see you again with a $5 super chat and a clapping corgi. I am Letta, one of our wonderful channel members, with a $2 super chat. Good to see you this afternoon, Letta. And James Thomas with a $10 super chat saying, "Thanks for the great views." And we've got one more great view to turn to now, as we are just about a minute away from the deployment of the Cygnus spacecraft. It'll make about a 40-hour journey between deployment and when it reaches the space station. NASA astronaut Jasmine Mugbelly will use the Canadarm2 to capture Cygnus and berth it to the Earth-facing port of the Unity module. Spacecraft arrival set to happen at about 4:15 a.m. Thursday, February 1st. About 10 seconds or so away from Cygnus deployment. And we have confirmation that Cygnus is on its way. Cygnus now making its way, flying free. A good spacecraft separation from the Falcon 9 second stage. Some beautiful views of deployment there. We're now T plus 19 minutes, 41 seconds and counting into this flight. As you can see, we have a great view of an empty launch pad, which not only great for this mission, but I'm sure the folks that are managing NASA's PACE mission, which is set to launch next from this pad, are also breathing a sigh of relief that now they have clear opening to get their mission ready to go, which is set to launch no earlier than Tuesday, February 6th. We'll have much more coverage on the PACE mission leading up to its launch, which of course stands for Plankton Aerosol Cloud Ocean Ecosystem, the name of the spacecraft, that acronym there. As we'd like to do with all these missions, before we go ahead and say goodbye, take a look at where things fell in the overall landscape of launches, both for SpaceX here in the US and around the world. Before we do, I want to give a quick shout out to Alan Klein for $2 super chat. Really appreciate that, Alan. Let's go ahead and take a look at where things are now lined up with a successful launch of this mission. As previously mentioned, this was the 10th flight of Falcon 9's first stage booster, tail number 1077. A brilliant landing of that booster that we just saw. This was the 295th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 10th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. There's a SpaceX's 240th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 10th orbital launch of 2024. Lots of 10s here. This is a big one for SpaceX, the 100th orbital launch in the last 365 days. This is only counting orbital flights, so Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets, not counting the SpaceX Starship launch tests, or test launches, I should say. So big 100 for SpaceX in the last 365. Congrats to them for that. This was SpaceX's 166th orbital launch from Pad 40 to date, and the 221st overall orbital launch from Pad 40. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 35th landing over at Landing Zone 1, LZ1, Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That makes the 44th SpaceX land landing in Florida between the two LZ1 and LZ2. This was SpaceX's 59th overall land landing when you count those over in California as well. And SpaceX's 269th overall booster landing when you factor in the drone ships. And finally, moving out to the launch industry as a whole around the world, this was the 7th orbital launch from Florida, the 11th orbital launch from U.S. soil. This is the 11th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company. Those numbers have been in sync, but they're about to shift because we have Rocket Lab coming up with its launch, which is set to lift off in the very early morning hours from the East Coast perspective. I believe their next Electron rocket is set to launch at 1:15 tomorrow morning, yep, on the 31st. Mission called Four of a Kind, in support of customers Spiral Global and North Star. See the strong back coming up there at the pad as SpaceX's procedure to turn its pad around as quickly as possible, getting ready to support its next flight. Last stat here for you. This was the 21st overall orbital launch around the world. And lastly, just to throw in the bar chart view of SpaceX launches, I'd just like to give you a good graphical representation of where they started and where they are now. We're at 10 on the year, but that number will only steadily climb as we are closing out the month of January. 11 more to go and a lot of launches on the schedule. SpaceX hoping to reach a record of at least 144, potentially 150 launches per year this year. So we'll see if they're able to reach that benchmark by the time all is said and done. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up for today. First off, I want to thank all the folks that have helped to make our live coverage possible. Thank you to all the wonderful moderators in the live chat, helping to keep the conversation kosher and allow for a robust dialogue about this and other space missions. Our thanks to our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions and Chuck Briggs for helping with some great tracking views of the rocket. Also want to thank, of course, our wonderful photography team of Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane. One more time, here are their handles on X. You can find them at ABurnNYC and MD Kane Jr. as they are hard at work getting their launch photos back. Already seeing some pretty stellar ones, so be sure to follow them on X as well as us here at Spaceflight Now. We're just simply at Spaceflight Now on X as well as Threads. Our thanks also to our editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical aspects of the show. The Cygnus spacecraft is heading here to the ISS, taking a live view from some of the Earth-pointing cameras here on station. Again, the Cygnus spacecraft is set to reach here at about 4:15 Thursday morning, February 1st, where the Canadarm2, controlled by NASA astronaut Jasmine Mukbeli, will snag the Cygnus spacecraft and berth it at the Earth-facing port on the Unity module on station. Last but not least, I want to thank all of you for taking some of your time on a Tuesday afternoon. Hope you've enjoyed our live launch coverage here at the noontime hour. Thanks for all your support, and we look forward to bringing you much more coverage throughout the rest of the week. Lots to come, including wrapping things up with our news from the press site wrap-up of space news. It's coming up on Friday, so be sure to, if you haven't already, subscribe to Spaceflight Now and turn on notifications so you get alerted when that conversation begins. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Be sure to be good to yourself, be good to others, and we will see you next time.